Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and this week's contract tip has to do with a buyer getting their earnest money reimbursed when they terminate a contract. So there are several factors involved with the buyer getting their own earnest money back when they terminate a contract within an unexpired contingency. And I am bringing this topic up because you as an agent, you need to be very careful and mindful of what you say to a buyer regarding their earnest money when they go under contract on a property. So for example, you're going to write a contract and you're going to make it subject to due diligence. So you tell a buyer, you are protected, you're subject to due diligence, you can terminate for any reason within this time frame and you will get your earnest money back. And that is true. However, what the buyer hears and what you say are two separate things. So the buyer thinks they're going to be able to get their earnest money back immediately. There are several factors involved with a buyer getting their earnest money back when they terminate a contract within an unexpired contingency. For example, if they terminate based on the due diligence or buyer's right to terminate period, and they terminate within the time frame before that has expired. Terminate and send that termination to the seller prior to the expiration of that. So one thing is that when they first put in the earnest money, when they first remit the earnest money to the holder does not have to act on those funds until those funds have cleared the bank, and that is license law. Each broker typically has a firm policy regarding holding, if the earnest money is, for example, in a personal check. Many firms have a policy on the length of time they will hold those funds prior to acting upon them or releasing them, whether it be to reimburse the buyer on a termination or foreclosing or so forth or so on. So number one, you need to check with the holder. If the buyer is putting in funds in a personal check, you need to check with the holder to find out their policy on a hold on those funds before they are able to act on those funds. The second thing is, if a buyer terminates a binding contract, termination of any contract is unilateral. You only need one party's signature to terminate, but you do need both parties' signatures. You need buyer and seller signatures. You need agreement regarding the disbursement of the earnest money. And so if the buyer terminates prior to the end of the due diligence time frame, buyer's right to terminate time frame, sends the termination and release agreement to the seller, the holder may not disperse those funds if we don't get both signatures, if we don't get the seller signed agreement on the agreement to release or disperse the earnest money. So you have to have, even if it is clearly within the buyer's due diligence time frame, the holder still may not act on those funds without written agreement between the parties that have an interest in the money, namely the buyers and the sellers. So if you don't get so what happens is, let's say you represent the buyer. The buyer chooses to terminate. You send in the termination release agreement. You send it to the listing agent to get the seller's signature. So it might take a couple of days before you get the signed release agreement back from the listing agent. So we've got a couple days there, and so you as the buyer's agent, you call the listing agent and you say, hey, I need that signed termination and release agreement back. And for whatever reason, the seller won't sign it. Either the listing agent can't get in touch with the seller, or the seller's upset, or you don't know what the deal is, but for whatever reason, you don't get the signed release portion of the termination and release agreement back. So that's a couple of days from the buyer terminating before you even realize that you're not going to get the signed release back. Then you as the buyer's agent, you need to contact the holder of the earnest money and let them know that you have quote unquote earnest money in dispute because the seller will not sign the release agreement. Then the holder of the earnest money, per one of the provisions in the contract regarding releasing the funds, has the opportunity to interpret the contract, interpret the series of circumstances, what happened, why it terminated, and who is entitled contractually to the earnest money back. So the holder then, by the time you send the information to the holder, the broker typically will take a day or more to do the research, look through the contract, read through everything, contact you as the agent, and find out if the notice of termination was sent prior to the expiration of due diligence. So for example, let's say the buyer terminated on the last day of their due diligence time frame. Well, just the date on that notice is not satisfactory in and of itself. The holder needs to determine, did the buyer's agent actually send that notice prior to the expiration of the time frame? Was it within the time frame agreed upon between the buyer and seller, so forth and so on? So there's research to find out, did the buyer, for example, terminate prior to the expiration of that contingency? Then, once the holder makes the determination contractually who is entitled to the earnest money, the holder has to send notice to the parties and to the brokers. So typically we send it by U.S. mail, return receipt requested, certified. So we have to look up the broker's information, the buyer's information, the seller's information. We need to send notice to their addresses and so forth and so on, and draft the letter. So that typically takes anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 days, depending on communication with the agents. And sometimes the holder will have to get in touch with the other agent as well to thoroughly research and investigate the situation. Then, as you guys know, it's called the 10-day letter. The holder sends the notice regarding the disbursement of the funds to the buyer and the seller, and the party who is not receiving the funds has 10 days to object to the holder's decision. And if the objection is based on some contractual evidence, for an example, let's say there was an amendment that was agreed upon and fully executed between the buyer and the seller, and the holder never got a copy of it. So if the holder changes their mind, they redo a new notice of disbursement, and a new 10-day time frame starts. But let's say it doesn't. Let's just say there's no objection. Well, you have to wait. The holder has to wait at least 10 days before they are able to disperse. And then, depending on the disbursement policy of the company, the broker holding the funds, it could be a couple of days. Let's say the accounting department of the holder, let's say they send out the earnest money through a bill pay system. Well, or ACH or something like that. Well, that could be another 2 to 3 to 4 days or so. So, yes, the buyer's earnest money is protected if, for example, they do terminate prior to the expiration of an unexpired, or prior to the expiration of the due diligence or buyer's right to terminate time frame. But the buyer thinks they're going to get their earnest money back immediately. We're talking, let's say it took us 2 days to find out the seller wasn't going to sign it, 2 days for the holder to do their research, 10 days for that time frame to go. So we're already at 14 days, and then another couple of days for the money to actually hit the buyer's bank account. So we're looking at potentially 16 days before that buyer will get their earnest money back. So if the buyer terminated and wants to write an offer on another house, that other seller is most likely going to want earnest money. Well, this buyer cannot use these funds for earnest money for another contract because this earnest money is tied up until it can be released by the holder per the terms of the contract. It is tied up, and it is not at the buyer's disposal. So again, just a couple of issues to bring to your attention to have that conversation with your buyers, because when you tell them their earnest money is completely protected and they can terminate on due diligence and they'll get their earnest money back, again, a buyer typically thinks they will get their earnest money back immediately. And as we just calculated, it could be a couple of weeks. So hope these ideas helped you out. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.